Hi there, this is Grumpy Opinions. Let's get on with the show. Hi there. So I've not been reviewing much recently, but then the other day I stuck on Apple TV, which apparently is no longer called Apple TV Plus, but sure, whatever. And I saw that Vince Gilligan, no, that's not him, Vince Gilligan, although they do look kind of similar. Anyway, he has a new show. And Vince being the showrunner and creator of Breaking Bad and co-creator of Better Call Saul, both great TV shows, and not to mention a writer of very many great episodes of The X-Files back in the day. So, good pedigree, interesting person to keep an eye on, and his new show is called PLURIBUS, with a 1 instead of an I, which means... Well, actually I'll get to that later on, because first I'm going to say that, up front, this is a show that could be spoiled, and if you go into it blind, you're probably going to have a more interesting time. So maybe, just maybe, stick on that first episode and have a wee look for yourself, before you watch the rest of this video. Up to you, okay? So what happens in the first episode? Spoilers incoming. So in episode 1 of Pluribus we meet Carol Struka. Carol is a writer of lurid romantasy books about sexy pirates who sail a sea made of purple sand. Which is very, very similar to the plot of Tress and the Emerald Sea, which is a book by Brandon Sanderson that dropped during COVID. I mean, I'm guessing it's just an in-joke. Otherwise, I imagine lawyers would be knocking on the door. Anyway, she and her manager Helen, who is also secretly her girlfriend, and is actually the person the sexy pirate in her story was based on, are mid-book tour, having a drink and a smoke outside when she notices that there's chemtrails all over the sky. And then suddenly Helen has a fit and everything goes to absolute hell with other people fitting and collapsing all over the shop. And then Helen dies. And the rest of the people just kind of get up and walk about like slightly disinterested zombies who keep saying things like, and occasionally providing assistance and helpful advice. Until finally Carol manages to get home with Helen's body in tow, and next thing you know, she's on the phone to the White House as one of the only surviving normal people left in the world. And just in case that does sound interesting and you fancy watching the show, this is your second warning to get out before I spoil the other thing, which to be honest is actually kind of spoiled in the first 5 minutes of the show. But there you go. A giant space antenna array picks up a weird 4-part signal that's been repeating throughout space for possibly all of time. And they realise that the 4 different codes of it are actually DNA codes. So of course the American military decides we should decode that and test it on mice. Although one of the mice deliberately plays dead and bites a human, who immediately then kisses their colleague. And then the colleague turns into a sort of happy alien zombie. And after that the pair of them go about super spreading until there's a whole base full of them who were enacting some kind of master plan, the ultimate end of which was when Carol saw the planes, and that was them enacting their world takeover. But what do these thems want? Well, apparently they just want everyone to be happy. They want the world to be a happy, lovely place where things run nicely and are peaceful and good and all things are just nice. And they're looking into trying to figure out why things didn't work on Carol so that they can fix it so she can be part of the fun as well, which she is not really into. End of episode 1. So it's an interesting premise to be sure, and episode 2 introduces the character of Zozia. Now she's a South American woman who's a dead ringer from the female version of the pirate off of Carol's first book cover. So via a long intro sequence they send her to be an intermediary. And although Carol's initially kind of abrasive and ends up sending Pirate Lady and all the rest of the thems into a fit when she shouts and yells at her, eventually Carol accepts some help and gets a hand burying Helen in the garden. And then lets them arrange a meeting between her and the 5 other normal survivors who also speak English. Apparently there are more, but they don't sprechen the lingo good enough, so Carol says no, not trusting the thems to translate. But when they all meet up on Air Force One, the 5 survivors actually all seem to be generally quite happy with the situation. Apart from one of them who really doesn't like Carol, but that's because when she caused all the thems to fit, her grandfather died in a car crash. But in general, none of them are actually interested in trying to fix the world back to how it was. And interestingly, all of them have family members who are now one of the thems. This guy especially, who just seems to be living at large and insisted that they use Air Force One as his private jet, and he's got a bevy of beautiful women in kind of a harem, something that the thems apparently don't have any issues with. In fact, it turns out that the thems don't have many issues with a lot of things. They can't kill or harm anyone or anything, they're vegetarian, but they don't mind cooking dead animals for the survivors. But their weird pacifism is kind of ironic because the takeover itself resulted in the deaths of
886,477,591.
But, I mean, still, the them seem to just want the survivors to be happy, as clearly unhappiness is what causes them to have the fits, which it turns out also in turn
killed 11 million.
And finding this out sends Carol into a kind of drunken stupor and then into a rage, which unfortunately then causes another fit. And the result of that being that most of the normals then abandon her, apart from Pimp Guy. But he's off to just have a bit of a party and have some fun, so he wants to borrow Pirate Lady for his harem. Pirate Lady's quite happy with it, but Carol is like, whatever. But then changes her mind at the last minute, heading home to, well, try and figure this out, I suppose. So what did I think? Well, here's the thing. Part of the reason I wanted to make a video of this in the first place, besides boredom, because I was recovering from a fairly nasty illness when I actually watched this, and I will say, not feeling great possibly may have slightly hampered my enjoyment of the first episode and limited how funny I found the comedy, just because I was kind of in pain at the time. But also, having looked at the parts of the internet which is talking about this, which is limited because, yeah, most of the channels and things don't seem to cover shows on Apple TV, but most of the chat has revolved around Vince Gilligan and Breaking Bad and how great Rhea Seehorn is playing Carol. But honestly, I thought that the show wasn't that great. I thought it was okay. Certainly wasn't a bad show. I mean, we're not talking like Blood of My Blood or Star Trek Discovery or something. But what it was is kind of an occasionally dithering palaver. Now, let me actually start off with the good stuff. So, it's a well-acted show. I mean, yeah, Rhea Seehorn, her off of Better Call Saul, and also basically everybody else in this is really good. I mean, there wasn't a bad performance in this, and it's put together well, it's well shot, it's well made. I mean, you can really feel that kind of the Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul kind of look and feel of things. And also, obviously, it is set in Albuquerque as well, and there's even a couple of little visual gags and nods to things from those show. It's also a show that has some really interesting ideas. I like sci-fi. I like interesting concepts. I like having things to think about when I'm watching stuff. And there's so much you could explore in this. I mean, the concept, the big moral dilemma and conundrum that they float at the end of episode 2, for example, the idea that basically the thems, and I don't know, the show isn't calling them thems, that's just me, but the thems are really happy to do anything for the surviving normals, right down to basically being sex slaves. It's not explained exactly why, and you could possibly interpret it as maybe because all of humanity is one giant happy hive mind, so because everybody knows and feels everything everyone else does, then maybe that means everybody who's happy to do something just makes everyone happy to do something. But it's a bit strange because also everybody knows all the knowledge of everyone else, which is played out in really interesting comedy fashion. Like the bit where Carol ends up quizzing like Lamex's son about gynecology procedure to make a point.
For a pelvic exam, what kind of speculum do you prefer?
It would depend. Both have their uses.
Also, they do it cleverly, you know, the idea of them passing off the tools and the jobs and the items all seamlessly. But also, it was funny, like I love the fact that they made this point about recycling and that they want to protect the world. Which, I'll put a pin in that. It might not be much of interest, but it's just a thought I've been having. So essentially, these are all one being with the knowledge of all the rest of them. So, to get back to the whole moral conundrum, I mean, does that mean that everybody fancies this guy? Or that they just don't mind? Because effectively, if every individual is really just an atom or a cell of the whole being, then what does that mean? What does that mean for the individual? What does it mean for the individual units? The show hasn't delved into that, but it is only 2 episodes into it, and I expect that to some extent is what it's going to explore, at least I hope it is. It's not a wholly original idea. I mean, Star Trek has the Borg. They've done plenty of stuff with the Borg, and apparently there's an episode of Rick and Morty with a character called Unity who's basically just a giant hive mind, but it's not a show I've ever really watched, so I can't really say much about that. But if the show was going to go and explore that sci-fi side of it, and this could all potentially be an alien plot just to make the world perfect for an invader, turning humanity essentially into a race of pacifists who are completely unable or incapable of defending themselves against an alien invasion. Everybody would just sit there and go, well, we just want you to be happy, and they would just let it happen. Now, again, I don't know if that's where the show's going, and actually Vince Gilligan has apparently made some comments to say that really the alien side of the thing is not something people should get too hung up on. It's just kind of a mechanism to explore the other sides of the story. And yeah, sure, if you want to talk about themes, then sure, this could all just be an elaborate metaphor for being stuck in depressive grief and sadness, and everyone else in the world is telling you to cheer up, and that just makes you feel worse because maybe you need your pain. It could also just be something that maybe we're going to turn out that actually all these people are just screaming on the inside. Maybe it's like that bit from Get Out.
Oh, no. 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 No, 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 no.
But in any case, there's scope for a lot of ideas to be explored here. On the other side of things, I genuinely found a lot of this quite funny and clever. I mean, I didn't find it laugh out loud funny, but I found a lot of it kind of smirk-raising in a lot of ways. Like all the stuff to do with the book tour at the beginning. Some of the gags about the fans being silly, and then the bit about her replacing some Outlander books on a stand with her own books. Again, it made me chuckle. As I said, there was a little gag about a Brandon Sanderson book earlier on in the show. There's interesting character stuff, but for me, that's where things started to get just a little bit wonky. Now, my problem one is the pacing and the episode length. Essentially, both of these first two episodes have relatively little happen in them. In terms of like plot, there's not an awful lot going on. The first episode is basically just alien space thing, and they make a virus, and that's maybe 10 minutes of the episode. And the rest of it is two ladies on a book tour, one of them dies and the other one drags the body back to the house. That's the whole episode. That's all that actually happens in the episode. Yeah, there's plenty of dialogue, and there's some exposition in there, and there's an awful lot of comedy pratfalling. But most of it is incredibly long shots, long scenes, with occasionally far too many camera angles, and some unnecessary, although not annoying, dialogue. And seriously, the comedy stuff, as I said, is kind of dragged out. I mean, there's literally also lots and lots of literal dragging of people and things in these episodes, meaning that the show feels like it's dragging its feet while you watch it, both literally and metaphorically. So honestly, I think you could have actually made this a 30-minute TV show instead of an hour. It's certainly not unprecedented. I mean, think about shows like The Bear or Ted Lasso or Murderbot. And I think that actually would have suited this show better. Make it tighter, make it terse, make it snappier. Look, for example, the opening of episode 2 where we meet the pirate lady Zozia. At first, she's in Brazil, where we see she's literally a poor lady in hemp clothes, who moves from one job into getting a vehicle to piloting a plane to showering, dressing, and eventually turning up on the doorstep of Carol. Now, that takes about 10 minutes of the episode. And sure, okay, it's a nice little sequence, and there's a lot of visual exposition, but most of what you see there isn't actually that important to telling the audience things that they either don't already know, or that we don't get told and repeated in dialogue later. That whole sequence could have been half that length, and it would have felt better. And I don't like the feeling that my time is being wasted, and here it feels like that. I feel get the sense of this is supposed to all be uproariously funny, like all the shenanigans, like it's supposed to be so gigglesome. Maybe if you were drunk or slightly high, then maybe you would, because some of this stuff feels like they're aiming for the K-Lud scene from Wolf of Wall Street sort of vibe. But that doesn't really work for me, where a major character has literally just died on screen, and it was sad. You can't suddenly change gears from that to having people guffaw at Carol being a klutz with a gurney. And I'm not arguing that the show doesn't set itself up as a comedy. You know, there is the whole tonal thing where a show or a film or anything will set up its intention in the first scene if it's doing it properly. Think of your Game of Thrones, for example, where it's a bunch of medieval guys getting spooked by ghosts and murdered by zombies in the snow, telling you that this is a serious, gritty, gory medieval kind of show. Breaking Bad, there's a guy almost shooting himself but also standing in the middle of the desert in his pants, telling you this is a drama but it's going to be tongue-in-cheek. This show literally starts with zany, silly Space Watcher people, one of whom is literally the guy from Drunk Histories, in a scene that feels very, very similar to one from the movie Don't Look Up, which was absolutely a comedy. The only thing is, this show is not a comedy in the same way that Don't Look Up is a comedy. Now sure, this show has comedy, lots of it, and most of it isn't laugh-out-loud comedy. It's mostly kind of smirking moments like normal drama with a slightly heightened edge, and then you do get stuff suddenly like Dead Helen and the deaths of 800-something million people, and weird allusions to sex slavery and people being zombies. And that ends up feeling tonally all over the place, and it means I'm less likely to laugh at the jokes. And with lots of the show being very slow and with scant dialogue in places, makes it occasionally hard to know how we're supposed to be engaging with the material. And there's another issue in that Carol is supposed to be a writer, and apart from being grumpy and being a bit bored with her lot writing romantasy and wanting to write a serious book, we don't really know very much about her, other than, she never came out to her fans and everyone doesn't know that she's actually a lesbian. It's a show where you expect her to have thoughts and feelings, and yet when she's confronted with the thems, who literally continually ask her, do you want to know anything? What can we tell you? How can we help you in this situation? She just blanks them, and sure, she's in grief, she's in shock. But it feels really strange, and sometimes it feels overly constructed. There's a scene in episode 2 where she finally meets up with all the actual humans, away from the thems, and she wants to actually talk to them, human to human. And the whole scene is so overblown and so ridiculous and so overwritten, because instead of the conversation sounding realistic, it ends up feeling contrived. And one of the weirdest things is, despite the fact Carol is trying to explain that the thems are bad and that the alien takeover is bad, she never mentions that Helen died. And she never actually mentions that anyone died. And I thought this was really strange because it's all she's really spoken about or mentioned or had anything to do with since the middle of the previous episode. And yet suddenly it's the one thing she doesn't bring up. Even when someone literally says, oh, because of you, my grandfather died. And she doesn't say, well, I'm really sorry, but also I feel for you. My partner died in this whole thing. It just seems weird, and I couldn't understand why that wasn't mentioned until the next scene where it gets suddenly brought up in a series of escalating death counts, which, again, unfortunately was such a written and writerly way of doing it that I couldn't stop but going, ugh, this is not realistic. This is contrived for the sake of writing an episode of TV rather than actually fitting how you would expect a normal person or these characters to act. And things like that are problems that are pulling the show back from me and making it more difficult for me to actually really enjoy this. And I'm not giving up on this show. I'm not going to suddenly throw it away and not bother watching the rest of it. I'm going to see where it's going because I feel like the show at this point has to now, after having established a baseline, will need to actually now advance the plot with the next episode or two. So I will watch the next episode and see what happens. But at this point, I'm really not engaging with it. I'm really not enjoying it the way that other people seem to be enjoying it. Considering this is apparently the #1 show on Apple TV and is like 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. If you've seen it, what do you think? What are your feelings on it? Are you going to watch it if you've not seen it? Regular viewers, welcome back. You may have noticed I've not finished Snowpiercer Season 2 or Tales from the Loop. I do still want to finish those. I'll get those wrapped up and done. Hopefully before the final season of Outlander starts some point next year. I will be covering that. Again, I don't think I'm going to bother covering Blood in My Blood. I might do a single wrap-up video if I ever get around to watching the rest of it, which becomes vanishingly more unlikely the more time that passes because I really didn't enjoy it at all, what I did watch of it, which was 3 episodes. I will possibly continue this if episode 3 turns out to be good. And if you're new to the channel, like, subscribe, all that kind of jazz, and please drop a comment down below because I love to know who's watching the show and what you think. There's plenty of old videos to watch as well if you look through my back catalogue. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and these have been my grumpy opinions.